Buenas hamzu todos, niemand tau togwang. Hungukam si Luhu, ni Esteban Sangan. Si Ricky Jan Richard Pona, su hasistim querido, sa intention honesto. Hey, San Nuevo Nani. Hey, San Nuevo Nani. Hey, San Nuevo Nani. Bota bota chukay, tano bota chukay. Sobin zaman ang
So half a day, everybody. I'm here as a representative of the Fanohge Coalition, Philippines for Guahan's representative, and I'm going to give a brief introduction to the Fanohge Coalition and this event before we begin. So the Fanohge Coalition is a collective of groups and individuals united in their support for the rights of the Chamorro people to exercise self-determination and the protection of Chamorro's unique connection to the island of Guahan. As a collective dedicated to Chamorro self-determination, the Fanohge Coalition recognizes the importance of the upcoming elections for our congressional delegate. While decolonization can never rest in the hands of one single individual, the coalition is hosting this forum to ensure that Guahan's decolonization continues to be prioritized by all of our elected leaders. The purpose of this forum is not to endorse a particular candidate or political platform. Instead, the coalition hopes to provide space and opportunity to share in conversation. So specifically, we have Speaker Juan Pat Borja, who has graciously accepted to answer our pre-prepared questions today around the topics of the military buildup, decolonization, the decolonization plebiscite, and other social, political, and economic issues that affect our island. Unfortunately, Senator Telena Nelson was unable to attend today, so it'll just be the speaker today. And so I'll turn the mic to Joni Kerr, our moderator for today.
Sujus Maasi Josephine, thank you for that introduction. Hofade Todas Hamzu, Wahusi Joni Kenga Kerr. I am a member of the Fanohge Coalition. I represent the GCC Community Eco Warriors, Save Southern Guam Incorporated, and Putehi Latexan Save Retidian. Those are just 3 of the 38 organizations that make up the coalition. I am humbled and pleased to host this evening's Democratic Candidate Delegate Forum. Tonight, we have former Speaker Judi Won Pat, who is a 9-term senator of the Guam legislature. And as Josephine mentioned, unfortunately, Democratic Senator Telena Nelson was not able to be here. And the third candidate for congressional delegate is Republican Senator James Moylan, but he declined in order to allow the focus to be on the Democratic candidates ahead of the primary election, which is just about a little over a week from now, Saturday, August 27th. So I do want to emphasize that the coalition does not seek to endorse any particular candidate. Rather, we hope to provide our viewers with an opportunity to listen to Speaker Won Pat as we pose questions provided by coalition members. So, so before we start the questions, Speaker, would you please feel free to greet our audience?
Buenas noches, todos hamzu. Dios maasi na convida Judi para na forum para Fanohge Coalition.
Dios maasi. Okay, Speaker, we'll go ahead and we'll start with question number 1. What do you think are the most important issues facing Guahan today, and how are you going to prioritize them?
I'd like to start off by saying that there are 3 issues that for me are very important, and I do not want to prioritize one over the other, primarily because they are equally important. And what that is securing our families, strengthening our economy, and protecting our environment. All those 3 are related, interrelated, because one is dependent on the other. So if our environment is not healthy, like for example, our aquifer, you know, it has toxins in it. It will cause people, of course, our families to become, you know, ill. They'll be unhealthy. And if so, that's our environment. And if our economy is not thriving, it is going to make it very difficult for our families as well to be able to have the resources that they're going to need to, you know, protect their families and support their families. But when I say families, I'm talking basically about our veterans, our manompos, individuals with disability, individuals afflicted with drug addiction. You know, it's just a whole slew of quote unquote individuals who make up a family. So when I say then that I'm going to push for the security of our families, it really addresses, you know, all that. When I talk about our economy, then it will be what is it that, you know, basically will be introduced to be able to allow our economy to thrive. And more importantly, any sustainable industries to do that. And then with our environment, what's really important to me here in particular when I talk about our environment will be our only aquifer, the northern aquifer, because we only have one and we're all dependent on that to be able to survive. So I'm not making one over the other in terms of prioritizing one over the other because they must all occur concurrently.
Well, thank you very much. Okay, let's go to question 2. COVID-19 and increasing living costs have impacted a substantial portion of Guahan's island community. How would your office build financial support for Guahan in Congress?
I feel that this particular time is the most opportune time for Guam to go out there to bring in resources, financial resources for Guam. And the best way to do this, at least for me, and I'm hoping others would agree, is to be able to connect the U.S. strategic interests of Guam. And because they're here for national security, and we're going to be burdening, of course, our island and our family to be able to shoulder that. But they must not forget that they must also consider the security of our families and how, you know, our environment again will be affected as a result of that, and our economy. So the way to do this in particular, the way I see it is, and of course it can't be now because already Congress is going to pass the NDAA, but most likely for the next year will be to be able to add language in the NDAA for several things that we already know that Congress have considered, and we are starting to see it, but I want to solidify it, to make it a guarantee, so to speak, is that the billions of dollars that we're told that are going to be coming to Guam, that those dollars translate to high-paying skilled jobs and technical jobs outside the fence. I know they're bringing in the people for inside the fence, but I want those monies to be able now to support our people outside the fence. This other thing I like to do too is that when there are bids being put out, these contractors are going to get the bids, that language there will say that any contractor working, and we're talking about Guam specifically, working in the territory of Guam, that they must adhere to the laws of Guam. And in particular, is to make sure that these contractors then do register with the revenue and taxation, and that then they will pay their fair share of the GRTs. So that's monies again, going into the community. And I'll never forget this, when McCain came here and we met him at my office, and he said, I know you guys are asking for a whole bunch of stuff. It's like you threw in the kitchen sink. Then I said, Senator, then help us help ourselves. And he says, what do you mean? I said, if you would put language in the NDAA to then tell these contractors that when they come here and they pay their fair share of the GRTs, then those monies we can use to then provide all the other services in the different departments and agencies that are going to be impacted. And that's the kind of language that I want in the NDAA. The third is, and I've spoken to many contractors, and one of the things, and even as a matter of fact, the Dr. Johnston, Bert Johnston, at his technical school and construction school, and he was saying to me that one of the things that he's always been trying to do is to be able to train and teach, the younger generation, to get them interested in going out to do the work that's needed here in Guam. But what we're not seeing is language, again, for training. Training our people so that there won't be that dependence or reliance on H2 workers. Now, granted, we're always going to need H2B workers, but I want it to be where our people would have that opportunity, that language for training. So if they have a large project, and of course, I'm not the person to decide what that would be, and later maybe to get that percentage, so to speak, that they must have certain amount of monies to be set aside to train or to bring these individuals in, and they train them, they mentor them, so that eventually they would be able to replace some of the other H2 workers when we train our locals. The fourth thing is I would like to see, and we're in Guam, yes, I want preferential treatment to be able to allow our small businesses to participate in many of these big contracts so that they too will be able to benefit from that. And that's the economic side in terms of jobs, basically. But then there are many other things as well that where monies can be brought in. Is that language, again, to allow the H2B workers for them to be outside the fence, so that by having them outside the fence, then they'll be able to build more homes. Because right now we're finding out that they're not building like individual family homes, but they're building barracks, for the soldiers who are coming, but I know that families are coming too. And so when they come, they're going to get these housing vouchers that they'll be able to take out to the community. And, and I don't blame any of our homeowners who want to fix up their homes, rent them out to military first, second GURA. But then what about our local people? Who's going to rent to them? They're having a hard time. Honestly, here at our shop, I have one young guy who has to room with 3 other guys so they can afford rent, because they can't do it alone. So 4 guys in one house. My other employee stays with her siblings and her parents, and she sleeps on the couch because she can't afford either to go out. So by allowing now the workers to come out and to be able to build homes outside, more homes outside, then there are going to be other monies that the local government should be working on to be able then to allow for these contractors to build on outside. And one example that I was sharing with them is that if there should be a not-for-profit construction company, with the understanding that by having that status is that then you'll be able to build a home at this particular rate and no higher HC than that, to maintain, your status and not to be taxed as well for building these homes. But that's a local issue, and I've already dropped the hint with several senators as well, so hopefully they will run with it. The other is, and I know that GORA for housing, Section 8 provides housing for low-income families and also for some of the homeless so that we can reduce the numbers. And we have not seen an increase in a while. And that is something then I think now is overdue, in which then, there will be a need then to have language to be able to raise the amount of money coming in by percentage. So this is not just going to be for us doing this, because I'm hearing this in Hawaii, I'm hearing it in California as well. So it's going to be when I go in there and I start to lobby for this, others are going to buy into this because they too, their places are being impacted. But the one extra thing that needs to be done, I believe, is that the GAO, to enlist the GAO to do a study to see the impact of off-base housing allowances, and then when they do that, then maybe they would also make some recommendations so that we in Congress will be able to find a solution, or maybe even for the individual local states and territory, their governments to do the same thing as well. So so that's what I'm saying now for families, when you think about it, about housing, of course, jobs for the economy, but the other big thing is food security. And I say this because we ship in 90% of our goods, our food to Guam. And so therefore, I feel it is important to work very closely now with the U.S. Department of Commerce and USDA to be able to fund sustainable, monies for sustainable agriculture and aquaculture for Guam. I will add that I know there's been a study that was done for aquaculture and the feasibility of introducing that and making it bigger than what we currently have, where a farmer would just take from their farm like one container full of tilapia or shrimp to the market, but to have it on a larger scale. And the reason why I say this is because that study has inform basically the government or whoever the recipients are of that study that Guam has the perfect climate for aquaculture. And then when you consider our coastal villages, that this could be even a project really, or a business venture for like a village per se. So let's say in Alahan, okay, because I'm from there, that the people will get together in Alahan. And they're all going to have this like a co-op of farmers, aqua farmers in the village, and to be able to build it, attend to it, and sell it. And because I saw this in Yap when I was with APIL, we were always looking at what all the different islands were doing. So I saw this in Yap, where a whole village decided to raise these, baby clams, and they were shipping them off islands, and it was the whole village. So they would guard it, they'll watch it, they'll make sure there's no vandalism, they'll make sure that the water, is constantly changed. I mean, they're doing everything as if though they themselves are, the quote unquote, the company or the business. Is the whole village participating in this. And that's what I like to be able to see as well. I mean, of course, I'm not going to be the one to do it, but by bringing in the monies to be able to do this, would help then relieve, the burden of having to ship in, foods and things of that nature. Because I don't know if you recall this, because I know when I went shopping a couple of weeks ago, and I asked the cashier, said, what happened? Normally it's full. He said, the ship didn't come in. How many times have we experienced that where a ship didn't come in? And and when you got to think about this, when we're talking about national security also, anything could happen anytime. And then what are we going to do when the ships don't come in? And if you recall, the whole purpose at the time when they had drafted 100 years ago, almost 100 years ago, the Jones Act, was that these ships were going to be U.S. everything. Why? Because at the time of war, they will be able to commission that ship to be able to help and provide, and deliver, goods to, food to, all of the different, military ships. That was the primary purpose of it. It has never changed, since, and it stands today. So we need to kind of plan ahead as an island, because there's so many things that definitely could affect the goods coming in, and we must be able to sustain ourselves. And don't forget, many, our ancestors did prior to, any canned goods, so to speak, coming in, to Guam. The other thing I think is important for jobs as well is to reestablish the ship repair facility. And I'm sure who's on the chat, on the Zoom here might not remember this, but at one time when my father was, in Congress, he fought to keep SRF here in Guam, ship repair facility. And they were strong 400 or 500 laborers. These were what they call middle-class workers, highly skilled workers, and he fought to keep them here because the ships will come here. And I recall of other members of Congress, I'll never forget this, Congressman Burton would say, Pat, you're such this small guy with no vote, but yet so powerful and so influential to keep the ships and SRF open here in Guam. Today, I'm hearing that the ships go to Singapore. And and I can understand why Singapore too, but I mean, that particular port we don't have the same amenities as Singapore, and why ships will go there. And then there are ships also that will go to the Philippines. We all know that. But I think because the best strategic military sense will be to build it, repair it here in Guam. And I remember early on when the EIS came out, one of the things that they said was why Guam was selected, why they were interested in building, having the military build up it. Because everything by ship, 7 days, by, 3 days, and flying time, 3 hours. But then if you go to Hawaii or elsewhere, it's, we all know it takes 7.5 hours to get to Hawaii, and then even longer to go to San Diego. So that was the reason why here, because of a quick turnaround. So by the same token, by repairing the ships here would make more sense for them. But see, it balances it as well, because then it will help us, our community, to provide more jobs again, especially middle-class jobs, and then more monies that will be able to, revenues and jobs that will stay here. So that's the, I know this is a long one, I'm telling you, because there's just so much. And now when we think of health of our people, when I say our families again, we all know that the door has been open for the whole discussion on SSI. And it started with the individual from Puerto Rico and the Supreme Court making a decision. And of course, this is like a double-edged sword, but it's definitely something to still consider. Finding experts, and attorneys, to be able to look at this. But when the Congressional Research Services were tasked by members of Congress to look at the SSI, they basically recommended 3 things. And the 3 things basically is throughout the law is to amend the definition, you see, of states, to see whether to make the other territories qualify to be able to get SSI. So that, when you think of SSI, we're thinking of our individuals from Manampu, again, who fall in that category, our individuals with disability, and the visually, impaired. And so, and then the other big thing is, they're all big stuff, really. Our veterans, and I feel so, honestly, I feel so bad for our veterans, but this is something that they have been asking, they have been suffering, they've been denied, they spend money to have to go to Hawaii. And the other day, a friend of mine left 2 days before last week's forum. And then the night of the forum, I was talking to him and he said, "Why are you calling me so late? Hawaii right now is like midnight." He says, "Oh no, I'm back in Guam." I said, "What? You only went for 2 days and you're back?" He said, "Yeah, but that's really all that you needed to do." And I said, "Oh my gosh, we can't be doing this to our veterans. They need to be treated better." And so, and I'm really very happy that, when the governor was talking about a medical facility, I love the idea that there would be a veterans wing. And because the veterans are saying that CBOT is too small. Secondly, the doctors are always rotated out, so there's no continuity in medical service. And they want somebody that, knows their medical history and will be here in Guam. And so, and although, by putting those 4 different departments, so to speak, in a facility, a comprehensive, so to speak, medical facility, monies will be needed. And that's where I like to see them, is to be able to bring in resources to have that dedicated regional health facility and to expand services for Manamco, especially home care for Manamco. My son-in-law's father fell and broke his hip, and it was so difficult for the family, and there's only one person basically helping, and he needed additional home care. And there's just really very limited, once or twice a week. And to the point where eventually you have to go to the veterans, you have to go to public health, and, but I'm just saying that we're fortunate that he has that. But what about other families who don't have the benefit of, being a veteran and having some health services? So that definitely is a big issue. We're always saying too that we want our federal local ratio for Medicaid to be increased. And either we lift the cap completely, or we try to keep it at the current rate right now, which is temporarily waived, okay? Because they have given Medicaid to the FAS citizens who at one time were getting it, then they discontinued. Now they're continuing it because of COVID. And so, but it's going to expire in this December. So that means then that if nothing is done between now and December, then we lose all those monies, and that to be able then to assist individuals who normally would be covered by Medicaid. So I like to see that addressed, for the next term. Okay.
Well, I counted at least at 11 or 12. I just have the long list of possible strategies to increase our, the financial support of Guam. And I feel like you have a wonderful grasp of our issues, our problems. So I mean,
it sounds almost like too aggressive, but I'm that kind of a person that I have to set goals for myself. So I know what it is I'm going to be working on, every day, rather than just going there and not knowing what it is I'm going to do. I can't. I remember when I was first hired to be at the CAO at GACS. And then when they said you're hired, and I said, well, can you please tell me, what do you want me to do? So they wrote me a letter and said, here are the 4 things that you need to do. That's what I want. And that's why I'm doing this, to set goals for myself as well, which is really aggressive, I know. And I could be shooting myself in the foot for as far as anybody, can tell. But nevertheless, I have to be working at this. This is something that has to be done once and for all. We've got to address some of these issues. And, you know, like they always say, strike when the iron is hot. And this is it.
Yes,
This is the
yes,
time.
I do agree. And we're coming up with to one of our questions where that would
Okay.
actually work. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so let's go to question 3 and we'll work our way through. What congressional committees do you plan on joining and why?
Well, that's a really good question because history have shown, at least with many of the delegates, is that there were 2 committees that are very critical to Guam. One will be the Armed Services Committee, and the second is Natural Resources. And I say that because, again, of what's going on with national security, with the military presence here. And then when you think of natural resources, you have to think of the individuals or topics that they have oversight of. One is the compact, 2 indigenous issues, you know, and we've got, you know, then the other natural resources, you know, for on the island. But in those committees, that's why I'm saying it's critical to be in those committees, because that's where all the work happens. That's where you hear bills, you get reports, you have the dialogue or debate. And once the committee members have amended the bill that has come before them, technically, it's like, it's a markup, and then that bill goes out, you know, on the docket for members to vote. And by that time already, there really isn't any debate on the floor anymore because all the work has been done in the committees. And that's why it's important to be there in those committees. And in particular, all the things that I mentioned earlier, those are amendments that could easily go into the NDAA. And I say this because if there's any one bill that Congress has to pass, is the NDAA. So that is the best vehicle, if possible, to put those the language in there for all of the things about, you know, jobs. And when you connect basically our families, our economy, and the environment to their U.S. strategic interests, it's going to be very hard to kind of pull it apart and say, no, that's not related, because they are all related. And so that's why that committee is important to be there, because that's where the decisions, you see, are being made. So, and yeah, well, I guess that's.
Yeah, I guess just for our viewers who may not be familiar, what is NDAA?
Or the National Defense Authorization Act.
Okay,
That's
thank
their
you.
budget. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No problem. It is a mouthful to get out.
Yes, that's true.
Okay, wonderful question or answers. Okay, so let's go to number 4. Nearly every week, we hear about increasing tension in Asia and the Western Pacific. We also see the environmental and economic effects of the military buildup on our island. So what role do you see yourself and your office taking with respect to the military buildup in Guam?
Well, this goes back again to being a member of the Armed Services Committee, because whenever there's any military activity, discussion is going to come up. Like, for example, right now, they're talking about a 360-degree missile system, defense missile system. And so, and it's not just only during the budget hearings, is that there's always this oversight that's taking place. There's always this request, because then it's right now it's because it's part of their budget. They're asking them, you know, a lot of questions. So every time there is going to be a proposed military activity, it has to go to Congress, because then they're going to have to justify, you know, their budget. And what is it for? How much is it going to cost? When is it going to be built? You know, when is it going to be transfer, all those kind of questions that, Congress members would want to know. So it's in the committee is where it is critical that the delegate then builds this partnership with the military, and reminding them always is to remember to put the needs of Guam first, because this is our home. And without the island, they won't have a place to be able to operate either. So, you got to take care of the people who is, quote unquote, sort of like hosting you, so to speak, here on the island. And that's all we've really been asking, is to try to balance this. And the best way to do it is to partner with them, to let them know that, we understand the criticalness of, them being here. But at the same time, they have to as well respond to the needs of the community. And how all this technically will happen is, like I said again, in the NDAA. And what else do you want to put in there? The H2B workers, the realignment and funding, all that happens in that committee. So that's, once we build that relationship, I think that it'll be so much easier to be able to defend what we need. The governor, I have to give her credit, because I remember the community were all against the idea of allowing the Theodore ship to dock here and then take all of the sailors out and put them in the hotel, because they were worried, because every day the numbers of COVID, affected men and women are increasing. That when she did that, it's when you think 4,000 people and you're totally in charge of all of them, it's that when, in that fanohge is the word that we use. And as a result of that, she's able to build a relationship, a working relationship with them now, that they're willing to listen now more. And I think that is exactly, what we need here as well. And, the one, I can't, help this, but always referring, I know, to my dad. But my dad was a proponent, of, the military who are here. And that's why he was, the first delegate, and he was in that committee, to the point where finally, when he was ready to, when he left, he was already, I think, number 3 in terms of seniority. So he had so much influence in the Armed Services, committee. And so he was able to build that relationship with them. And that's what I like to be able to do as well. And it's not just with that. I've done that in the legislature when I worked in the when I was a member of the legislature, to be able to build, relationships and partners with both the Republicans and Democrats. And I didn't treat them as if they're, well, you guys are in the minority, we're not going to bother, we're going to make a decision. Not at all. I was able to broach, you see, not coalition, but a collaboration between, both sides of the aisle. And that is something that's just as critical in Washington with the Department of Defense. And the door is already open, and I like to be able now to open it even wider, so that then, they'll start to understand. I like to be able, I know this is sometimes unrealistic, but I like to be able to think that because they are themselves, fathers and mothers as well, they have children in the military, and that we don't want anybody to be in harm's way, that's basically how they need to be able to treat us as well here in Guam.
Okay.
Sorry, it took a long time.
Thank you. No,
question.
I'm totally fine. But what we're going to do is we're going to skip a little bit ahead. Yeah.
Okay.
So one of the questions that we had was just yesterday in Washington, President Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. Yes, and so that gave basically $370 billion for supporting programs to combat climate change and its negative impacts. So can you let us know what your perspective is on climate change and climate justice, and perhaps what you plan to do in Congress to help support Guam and the other islands that are being negatively impacted by climate change?
Okay, that's a really good topic. And yes, I was very happy that it was passed. It's unfortunate that it went by party lines, but nevertheless, it's a really a victorious bill in the sense, really, because that has not been, in the works. Like the last time they had anything that had to do with a bill like this for inflation reduction was, I think, in the mid-'80s. And here we are now, how many years later that is being addressed. The first thing always that needs to happen in any bill that gets passed in Congress for something as massive as this is that we need to make sure that we get the administrative rules, to be able to define and set the parameters, for how the monies are going to be used. And you've heard that when the governor was saying that, when they were saying, oh, why can't you use this money, and all that, he says, well, we need to get clarification from the Treasury, department and all that. So that's the thing that needs to happen, because it's a large amount, and we need now to break it down to find out then how does Guam fit in. But I totally agree that, climate change is an issue now that everybody should be talking about. I used to hear this guy on the radio before national talk show, and he said, oh, hogwash, there's no such thing as climate change, global warming, all that. And I always said, dude, you need to come out here to the Pacific and see the small island nations and what's really happening to them. So climate change is real. And if these big countries don't start doing their part, because they contribute more to global warming than all of our small nations. And I say this because when I was at APIL, the Association of Pacific Island Legislatures, we go to all the different islands and we alternate who's hosting, and then we see what's going on there. And we actually had a conference or a general membership meeting on global warming global warming and the sea, rising. And one place that asked us to host the meeting was Kiribati. And my God, when I went there, I couldn't believe it. And I'll have to tell you, RMI has the same situation, because when you go there, you can stand in the middle of the road, look to the left and look to the right, and you see the ocean. And the highest point in those islands is the bridge that's connecting one island to the other, one atoll to another. That was the highest point. And then you've heard what has happened in RMI with the this king tides, that the water literally would come in. I mean, from one end to the other end will come in. That's real, and it's so visible. And if these countries don't start to make big efforts, to do this, then, whatever we do might not be able to help us. But climate justice, you have to remember, is that this is an urgent situation, and it's going to take, it's going to take the community to lead this discussion, just like RMI, what they did when, the minister, Tony DeBroom, brought it to the United Nations, and, he's well known for that. Kiribati, the president, also was able to take it to Australia, took it to Fiji, and unfortunately now they're looking at China because nobody's offering to help them. And this is where the US is missing out. they want all these islands. They want to be able to provide, and defend the nation, but yet they're forgetting all these little, islands, these atolls. But anyway, I think I know that's a whole different subject area, but.
Well, it also, what do you call it? Connects to national security in that way. If they're
most definitely
looking for help and they get help from China, then we're,
Yes.
then we
Yeah.
have more of
You're right.
that presence. Yeah.
So when you look at the bill, right, and I was able to pull out some things that there is language there that will provide for preferences to help disadvantaged areas, okay, that are affected by climate change. But we still don't know the details of that. We also know in the bill.
Very new, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's very exciting though. Yeah, what I've heard about it.
And then, there's incentives, of course, to be able to put solar panels, and wherever in our areas to help. I remember when my last term, I wrote that bill to allow for a GPA to put up solar panels in all our public schools, because when I saw their power bill, I said, oh my gosh, we got to do something here to decrease that, and how can we do it? So I don't know where that law went. And I do know that the lease schools do have them, but not the other public schools. But even that far back already, I was thinking, what can we do to help reduce the cost, and reduce our reliance, on fossil fuel, and try to go with the solar. I know that there's also in that bill for the territories, it talks about offshore wind farms, and it sounds good. It could benefit us, but we don't know the details of it. And what that says too is that it's going to be it's going to be the Secretary of Interior who will take the lead in this, and must get the concurrence of the governor, which is good. I'm glad that they did, so that we can then weigh what the benefits are for us, whether this will be beneficial or not for us. But because of our islands, one of the things that is so important here is starting up from our mountains down to our reef, because no matter what, our coastal areas will be affected. Our inland will be affected from either erosion. We've got this unpredictable, really, weather patterns that, we could end up with a lot of rain and flooding, and then destruction of our crops. And then you can get droughts that would end up with wildfires again, and then erosion when it rains. I mean, just think the havoc that it can really do to our islands. So what I think is, aside from getting, actual language, there, and it is such a significant issue, but, it's not something that, how should I say that, is something that we as small island nations can effectuate a big change. But we're definitely going to try to use whatever is available to us. It's not going to be enough. I understand there's like 15, I read that, I think in a release, like $15 million to be shared by all the insular areas. I mean, it's one just one island, one territory will be able to, can easily take that full amount, and where does that, put us? And that's the thing that sometimes I wonder whether, whoever had provided this amendment don't really know what's going on in the islands.
Yes,
to say
that's
that
why we need a
15 million.
champion.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because that's the one thing that's true that I've thought about this some time ago too, is that every bill that's going to come through, I want to make sure that we review it to see how Guam can be put into that bill in terms of whether it's definition or inclusion to be able to, to get monies. And I don't care how small the amount is, it's a continue to incorporate language in there, for Guam. That's what I like to be able to see.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is we'll move up to one more question that we prepared, but there are a few questions from the audience. So we only have about maybe 10 minutes to go.
Oh, so sorry.
We'll keep it. I know the time just flies. So, okay, so this is a very kind of important question for many of us on the island and actually all over the nation because of its divisiveness. So what is your stance on women's reproductive rights, including access to contraception and abortion? What do you plan to do in Congress to support your stance?
Well, I believe in women's right to choose, the woman's right to choose and to use contraception, and to decide whether and when to have children. This is a deeply personal, for me, a personal and private decision. And it's so important on the other end, when you think about this, to a woman's social, economic well-being and overall health. And nobody should be making that decision but the woman herself. Because we surely can't put our feet in her shoes, so to speak, to walk in her shoes, because we don't know. And in Congress, then what I would do is that, because the delegate will not have a vote, but I will surely support efforts to preserve a woman's ability to choose, whether to carry her pregnancy to term or her right to choose, to make a choice regarding, again, her health in private consultation with her doctor. And here in Guam, I know it is very divisive to start to take our reproductive rights away. And it's not enough, that I don't think enough rather is being done to support reproductive health care and to support women. And many, and you know this, even here in Guam and in the mainland, many of our households are women. The head of household are women. So one of the things, yes, that I'm thinking of is a definite funding to be able to, funding for pre and postnatal health care. I don't believe that, women are just going to be, what's the word? They don't take this, lightly. This is a serious matter for them, a very private matter. And some of them don't have any type of health care. And so if this is going to be an issue that's going to be brought up, and if it will pass or not, I'm not sure. But I want to be in the front end to make sure then that we have pre and postnatal health care for these women.
Dynamasi. Okay, so now what I'd like to do is ask you a question from the audience.
Okay.
This is regarding your father. Your father was a stand-up chamorro and a true man of the island. Despite his short stature, he made his presence known in the halls of Washington, D.C. What lessons did you learn from him that you will take with you into this new office?
Actually, I learned a lot from my father. I know it's kind of uncanny in a way, because I was thinking about this when I was decided to run. I could never figure this out for the life of me. My father always would take me to his office. And I always thought it was for busy work. He'll have me go into the office, arrange things, go through documents, and letters and papers. And I just would love to read it. That's why they would scold me, because I never would complete the task. And so I was doing all of these things. Then he would take me around. He would take me all over the Capitol, show me around, not just to the dining hall so we can have lunch, but he'll actually introduce me to members. He'll get a pass for me to go to the gallery to watch. He'll take me downstairs and we'll go to that little, subway, and everybody knew my father. So there's several things that is done in the office that I would definitely like to do, and should I make it to put in my office. One is that there'll be individuals in the Washington office who would be responding to all constituents. Because you'd be surprised that so many have called my father's office, and I would answer the phone, get some answer for them, and get back to them. I was doing those things because I was doing it even on a Saturday because, you know, the time difference and the difference in days as well. So you have an individual to handle all constituent cases. You have somebody also who knows the Department of Defense, who knows the Pentagon. You have somebody who knows the ropes and be able to write the bills and work with members of Congress and their other staffers. But that's a lot. That's where a lot of the work actually happened. So all those, you know, and I'm thinking in my mind that that's what I need, because I have to start running when I hit the ground. I have no time to waste. In the local office, the district office, because we have this situation with our veterans, is that I will commit to having a veteran liaison there to be able to navigate all of the veteran issues. So those are important. So and then whenever Congress is on recess, then he comes to Guam. And that's exactly what I would do. I would definitely come to Guam, meet with the people, have town hall meetings, you know, and then when we're back in session, it'll be working always, you see, on committees. Now, granted, so it's not just Guam. See, a lot of people don't realize this, because once you're in Congress, of course, and it's the nation's Congress, is that there are going to be opportunities as a member of a specific committee. And so let's say defense. And I remember that, you know, even Congressman Underwood, Delegate Underwood, and my father did it, Madeline did it, is that they sometimes have to go to another country or what have you, where, you know, there is that, you know, interest, you know, defense interest as well. And then for natural resources, it may mean going to the Virgin Islands or to Puerto Rico. You know, so it's not just all Guam, but then it's great because when they come to Guam, the other members come too. So then they're learning, they're being educated about, you know, Guam, and they'll end up becoming very supportive. So that definitely is key to educating members of Congress, is by having CODELs come to Guam. And I like to be able to do that as well. So there's a lot of things that I learned, yes, from my father's office that I most definitely will use. Nothing that will not change, because Congress is constant.
I'm glad you mentioned that how you would be communicating, and that your father actually set a good example of communicating with the people and meeting with them and accommodating their questions and so
and you know,
on.
one of the things also that he did that I also want to do is to be able to not miss anything, is that the district office must daily write a report of who came, what they did, and submit that, you know, so we'll be communicating every day. Newsletters will go out, websites is new. So now we're going to have a website as well to keep people, you know, up to date. So that's the kind of, you know, communication that I like to be able to build with, you know, constituents and with government leaders as well. Because the one thing I know that I heard one of the members of Congress say to my father, and he will say, Pat, it is important that you get everybody united, the legislature and the governor's office, for us to go to be able to pursue, you know, an issue. We can't go there divided. And that definitely will be one of the things that I want to make sure. And I know I have a very good working relationship. You know, like I said, it doesn't matter whether you're Republicans or Democrats. I will work with you because why? My father told me this. Sure, you're going to run as a Democrat or you're going to run as a Republican, but once you get in, you're now the representative or the senator for the entire island.
And I'm so glad you brought that up, because that was actually two of our questions. And how would you, what kind of a relationship you would build with the legislature and the governor? And also you mentioned that you would like to bring congressmen over to Guam. So there is a question that kind of relates to that, and, you know, schooling them about our island. But here's an interesting question. Some random member of Congress is always speaking ignorantly about us on Guam. We're going to tip over. We are foreign, like Marjorie Taylor Greene did. So how would you handle situations like that? I know
Well,
it's ridiculous, but
no, you're right. And you know,
no,
and
it's a
of
good
course-
question. Not the
yeah,
question
it-
is
it-
ridiculous.
it-
I mean, but
it is, no.
yeah.
And you see, and that's the one great thing about, you know, being an educator. And because what that will take, of course, is to educate them, to let them know. And it's going to be little things at a time. I'm not going to come right up and say, oh, you know, you're absolutely wrong. This is how it is. No, you build that relationship first, you see, so then they'll know who I am, you know, where I'm from. And then I start little by little then to inform them. I mean, sure, I know the congressman, what he did, he took some soldiers and they went and, you know, into more Mafakauto, you know, the congresswoman, right? But for me, that would be a little bit too forward, almost, you know, and instead of getting her on my side, it'll be like, I don't want to have anything to do with you, that type of thing, you know, what are you trying to do? So I wouldn't do that. Instead, I would really like to slowly work with, you know, the member of Congress. What's critical here too is that her chief of staff and then my chief of staff, we're going to have that relationship as well to kind of smooth things over so that then I'll be able to work with her or him. But definitely it's all about educating.
yeah, honestly, I agree with you. I'm an educator too. Okay, so this might be our last question, but we've been allowed to go over time. If you don't mind, that's okay with you?
Yep.
Okay,
No.
so what is your opinion of seeking a plebiscite for the political status of Guam? Do you think that all residents should be included? And if not, who do you think
Yeah.
should be included and
Mhm.
why? Yeah.
Well, the way I see this is that we were under the American flag for about 125 years, okay? Nearly 125 years. And we all love, you know, America. We all love the American ideals, you know, of respecting, you know, sovereignty and all that. So I feel that, yes, I do support that seeking a plebiscite for our political status. And by doing that, what I like to also do is to introduce a bill recognizing the Chamorro, you know, people's right. But this one's going to be different. It's going to be the Chamorro's right to a binding plebiscite. I know that, but it's always right now that, and because of the case, the Davis case that we have, it's a non-binding plebiscite. Whether it passes or fails, you know, it has to be done. And what that would do too is that it will kind of put everybody in notice, so to speak, that, you know, especially at a time like this, and we're always saying that we want to be at the table. How can we be at the table if we're not even a sovereign nation? And any one of those three, I'm not saying you have to be independent to be a sovereign nation, it can be any one of those three, but people don't understand this. Is that when we say that the people, I'm sorry, to go back to your other question, to say who should, and I am saying that the ones who are, you know, colonized are the ones who should be voting on the plebiscite. That's, you know, I feel that personally and strongly and passionately about it. But it's not going to take away anything from anyone else. Because all we're asking really when we say that we want to vote is we want to do, we want to have that right to vote for ourselves, because we've never had that opportunity. And we want to select one, whatever that one is, that It's be decided by the people. And once that happens, then we can move forward. Then that's where then we can also say now to all of the Guamanians, now's the time for you to provide, an input to help now us put a constitution together to build, that status, that new status of what it is that we want now Guam to look like. So we're not saying no to everyone, but I'm saying only to the ones who are colonized have to be the ones to vote. And whatever that is, I would be definitely really honored and happy to be able to take that to Congress. And some people are saying, well, you have to tell us what your position is. And I'm saying, no, I don't, because it's the people, it's not one person's decision, but the colonized people's decision.
Dynamasi. Yes. Well, there is one more. Let's see. Are there any federal programs that Guam is qualified for but doesn't know about? And I'm not sure how you would answer that, but that's just one question that came up in the audience.
But you're right. See, remember earlier when I said that what I want to make sure that we do is that we read all the bills being introduced coming through to be able to see where then have Guam been left out and how then can we be made a part of it. So I don't know what all those bills are. There is one, however, which is most recently, and I spoke briefly about it, only because, because I didn't know either when I was first, researching this about SSI. And I decided to go in and do my own research and went to the Congressional Research, Services to see what they did talk about it, and they did. And that's when I found out that at least I didn't know, but I'm sure attorneys know, is that all we really need to do, Congress needs to do, is to go in and amend the definition, and then by doing so, then Guam qualifies. Now, some people say, oh, that would be dangerous, but in many bills, how Guam participate is in that particular bill for that particular issue, is that Guam will be included in the definition where they say all states, and then they'll say and territories, or all states, and then, outlying areas, or similar language like that would then make the territories qualify. So it honestly could be almost any bill. It just, the question you have to ask, you see, is that something we really want to participate, in? Because it's just totally irrelevant, to us. It doesn't affect us. So why would we want to be a part of it? So we just let that one go. But where it affects us, which actually, when you think about this now, is that when you talk about, our political self-determination, it speaks to, the military, it speaks to immigration, it speaks to, global warming, it speaks to almost, every subject. You can almost tie it all in because the whole island will be affected.
Yes, thank you for circling back and connecting those issues, Dynamasi. So are there any other remarks that you would like to give before we close?
Man, I think you covered everything.
I think we might have covered a lot. Yes, there was a lot of ground
covered. I gave you guys a whole bunch, but I just basically want to let everyone know that my focus, my platform will be to secure our families, to strengthen our economy again for our families, and to protect our environment. I don't know if you remember this whole fight that was taking place in the States about, this company that wanted to run some pipes across there, and they weren't really getting, making any traction. But this is where it's critical for us, because truly for us, when I say that they're all related, and especially like our environment for people, because water really is life. It really is. And that was one of the biggest things that not just me, but the members of the legislature, when we were reading the EIS, is that we wanted to make sure that our water, is protected for everyone, because we only have one aquifer. And the reason why is because so many studies have shown that our people have suffered and continues to suffer and have rare cancers that for such a small community, we have so many. And you have to ask yourself this question: what is the common denominator when you think about this, And what is it that everybody, like they're saying, is drinking the Kool-Aid, so to speak? We're all drinking our water, and my defunto husband, remember now, who used to work at EPA, and he would test the water for drinking and recreational, and he would tell me, we have really the best, water. But of course, now we're finding out more things that we didn't know about. And, and that is there's this most recent study and advisory that came out that concerns me. And I've actually communicated with several people at WIRI and GWA and EPA to try to get in front of this so that we can mitigate it. So that's why I decided to put environment in, because it's definitely going to affect, our livelihood and our survival, so to speak.
Yes. Hongen. And I'm glad that that's on your radar as well. And for folks that aren't sure or aren't aware of what she's referring to, that would be the PFAS, polyfluoroalkylated substances that have been found in some wells on Guam. Not necessarily where you live, but mainly these would be on the base. But they're, we need to watch our water as well, and there's money that is going to be made available for filtering that out, cleaning it up. So hopefully that will get resolved. Yeah,
and that's why I'm saying I want to be in front of this, because 1 billion for about 285 and 2,800, I think, and 35 military bases in the United States and 2 territories. And so I'm saying, oh my gosh, 1 billion? All of the other states will get the money. What's going to be left for us? And that's where, again, I need to be in front of this to make sure.
Gotta be in front.
And then tie it again, connect it again. Because when I say our families, right? It's not the families only outside the base. It's going to be families inside, because I'm not going to discriminate. A family is a family regardless, There are mothers and fathers, grandparents and children, know that. So
yes. Okay.
I want to make sure that we'll be able to mitigate it, that we get the monies to be able to find out how we can filter whatever carbon they're going to be using. What would be the best way to mitigate it?
Sana Maasi, Speaker Won Pat. Yes, I'm so glad that you could join us. Dampulo messages Maasi to Speaker Won Pat and her team, and our audience in the Zoom room and on Facebook. And I want to thank our fanohge members for contributing the questions, and our audience as well. Josephine Ogo for opening the forum, and Dr. Michael Bivacqua for his guidance and technical support. And we also hope that this forum has helped you, the audience, to become a more informed voter this election season. And if you should vote, and because if you don't vote, you don't have an influence, and every vote counts. So we also hope that this forum starts a wider and more informed discussion about Chamorro self-determination. And I'm so glad we got to that question. promote self-determination and
Yeah.
decolonization. Hungen. Yeah, so that we can have a clear understanding.
Can I also then, suggest to all those who are listening and may not have the opportunity to ask me a question, that they do, and we'll be able to have an opportunity. I have actually scheduled every Friday from 12:30 to 2:30 at a SIGA. You're welcome to come to talk to me about, national issues. I will listen. I actually take notes, and I'm going to compile, all those will be like my marching orders, so to speak. I'm starting to set up my agenda, but yes, I want to hear from the people. I'm not going to go to Washington on my own agenda. It has to be the people's agenda. So please come and talk to me, call me, email me.
Yes, and that, again, if you didn't hear her say, that's at a Sika coffee shop in
Yes.
Tamuning,
Behind
Fridays.
Oka Payless. Fridays,
Oh, behind-
12:30 to 2:30.
Okay, we got it. Okay, so what we want to do to the fanohge Coalition wishes all three congressional candidates good luck, best wishes for a successful campaign. And I think we're going to end here. Thank you so much, Speaker Won Pat. So,
Thank
Esta,
you.
adios.
Adios, Masi.
Dios Masi, Sana Masi. Viva Guahan.
Viva.